I'm going to get more money in my pocket, and we're going to save the damn planet in the process. So very cool. Thanks, Dr. Tom. We're going to have a panel discussion now to talk about and validate some of the points that Dr. Tom talked about. And I'm just going to introduce the panel moderator, Dave Rice. Not only is he a friend of mine, and I'm an admirer of his, but he is the president of the United Nations Association in Orange County. He also is the leader of a group called CIS that is conscious entrepreneurs trying to make tools and innovations that are better for our planet. He's active in Orange County politics, including in the safe closure of the San Onofre nuclear power plant. This guy is like the Energizer Bunny, and he has his hands all over the place trying to save the planet and make life better for you guys. Please help me welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. First of all, I just want to reciprocate and thank Greg for his commitment to this cause and for bringing us all together. If you're like me and you've had a chance to speak to anybody at all who's here, you immediately realize how aligned we are, and that's just such a gift. So thank you, Greg, for all of that. So we're going to continue the discussion around hope for climate. With some wonderful experts also who are dedicating their lives to this space. And want to introduce Dr. Sarwat Chowdury. She is with our United Nations Association Orange County group as well as our climate ambassador. She spent over 15 years with the United Nations working on climate issues globally. And is teaching climate at UC Irvine right now. And she's going to be giving a bit more of a global perspective on what Dr. Tom talked about with what's happening, especially around the Paris Accord and the commitments that countries have been making and all the work that's going on that we don't really get to hear enough about. And so that's important. And then Heather Beatty has a wonderful story herself she's going to share with you about, leaving corporate for a commitment to this cause and currently invests in climate solutions and looks for opportunities to have a return on investment for the climate solutions, the kinds of things that Tom was talking about. So I think, and then with that, we'll have some questions here and a chance for some discussion, and then also an opportunity to have some questions from the audience as well. So, I know we're a little bit late already on time, so we'll cut this a bit, but, certainly encourage you all to be able to reach out and be sure to meet as many folks as you can that are here, because we all need to amplify each other's work and work together. So, Dr. Chowdury.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you so much. Like Dave said, I'm Sarwat Chowdury. I grew up in Bangladesh, which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. So all my life I've known about climate change. It's not something that's coming or in the future. This is something low-lying countries like Bangladesh are living with right now, are impacted by climate change. I wanted to show you this picture. This is actually a picture of Denali. This is the highest mountain peak in North America. I think it's about 20,000 plus feet, and federally it's called Mount McKinley, but by the local people it's called Denali, the high one. And how majestic is this, right? And I just came back from Alaska last week. So I wanted to share this beautiful picture and what we are fighting for, right? And with that, also I want to thank the organizers for starting with the kind of the earth spirit acknowledgement, because in my current life, like Dave said, I teach at the UC Irvine campus, and also I'm managing a climate action program. And University of California, Irvine sits at the indigenous lands of Hashiman and Tongva people. So when we are doing this kind of discourse on climate change and environmental issues, I think it's very important to recognize, whose lands we are staying, and it's to be mindful of that, because we are all earth beings, but we are also sharing with other And I think for a long time, when I was asked to speak on kind of a message of hope, I did want to kind of highlight that, the narrative around climate change has been negative for too long. So it's really important from my perspective that we change that narrative and we kind of look at glass half full and what are the positives. And thank you, Tom, for a very comprehensive presentation that kind of got us started. So I'm going to go to the next slide.
You want to advance the slides?
Bear with me, but I'm figuring this out. Okay, thank you. So I was asked to talk about the Paris Agreement and the NDCs, and thank you. So what are the nationally determined contribution? I won't read all of the information on the slide, you can see, but basically these are at the heart of the Paris Agreement and kind of signifies the efforts by each country to reduce their national mitigate climate change causing greenhouse gases, but also adapt to the impacts of climate change. And that means every country is requested to outline and communicate their post-2020 climate actions, the national determined contributions, every 5 years. So by kind of implication, 2025 is the year. Also, the countries are reporting on this. Okay, let's see how this works, okay? Is it me? Yeah, correct. I want to mention with the current environment and kind of, we know that U.S. moved away from the Paris Accord. As someone who grew up in a developing country, I want to highlight the steps that are being taken by developing countries in terms of climate change. Small island developed, SEEDS is an acronym you'd hear a lot at the UN. So small island developing countries that are among the most affected by climate change, even though they cause less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emission. And as you can see, between 1970 and 2022, they lost an average of 2.1% of GDP due to climate disasters. And Tom was showing us how the frequency has increased, right? Once in a 500-year disaster are now predicted to be once in 5 years, right? So these small countries, they are forefront of the climate impacts, but they are also at the forefront of solutions and have made strong commitments. So you see the examples of Mauritius and Seychelles. I have had the opportunity to work in Mauritius with the UN. Wonderful country, but very climate vulnerable. And they are taking actions to reduce greenhouse gases by 40% in 2030. And move from energy to green sources. So let's move on to the next one. Yeah. So the COP, thank you, Tom, for introducing the COP. So next COP is going to be happening in Belém and Brazil in November, right? So when I was working for the UN in my previous career, every year I would be going to the climate COPs with the country delegations, supporting them in their negotiation processes and also organizing side events. And because for developing countries, this is the venue where they can talk about climate finance, which is very important. Like you heard from Tom, with financing, there's a lot of technologies out there. But for developing countries, where is the money coming from, right? Many of these countries were historically colonized, right? They haven't had the chance to industrialize, but now they are being asked to reduce their greenhouse gas emission and move from fossil fuel to renewable energy. That needs a massive infusion of funds. So one of the issues that's going to be discussed in Belém is about climate finance, both from private and public sector. And because we are talking about green economy, I also wanted to introduce the definition of green economy from one of the UN agencies, International Labour Organization. This is really important to talk about, and that's why I wanted to also introduce the concept of just transition. Because without just transition, developing countries will be leaving behind, right? We're going to be leaving them behind. So it's really important to have an idea of what we are asking about from developing countries. So because a lot of the poorest countries are least able to cope with climate change, and to making sure that the financing is available, the technology are available. So UN agencies like the United Nations Development Program, where I worked for over 15 years, we were doing that, supporting countries to apply for funding sources like the Green Climate Fund and other sources, global environmental facilities, so that they can take advantage of the technologies that are coming abroad. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of conclude with a couple of slides about how we kind of, these are kind of some of the grim realities, but these are also important that we stay positive in terms of, as a couple of terms I like are like being climate curious, right? Because sometimes when you hear about climate change and impacts and sea level rise, it just, people just kind of glaze over like, okay, this is beyond my control, or, this is something, what can I do about this? So we stay climate curious, we stay climate positive, and also to be mindful that progress does not always happen linearly, right? So there are, faltering, and then we can kind of move forward. This is especially true for the UN agencies right now in the current environment when the financing is being cut down. And we are also seeing more and more action from the private sector. So this is an example of Deloitte, where the employees are asking for more climate action. And this data kind of shows that like 2/3 of the employees believe that their employers are falling short. So they are asking for additional action to integrate sustainability in the core strategy of their organization. We all know about Patagonia, Microsoft, who have already embraced this kind of shift. And while the US moved away from the Paris goals, philanthropics like Bloomberg pledged $500 million to this cause to put into renewable energy, empowering citizen states to act as leaders. So we are seeing, so that's the last one about communicating climate change. So it's really important to connect the dots about climate change. Again, not to make sure that we are not kind of talking about gloom and doom all the time, but making sure, like if it's just one speech for all, which was happening early on in my career, we are talking about climate change, sea level rise, species extinction, things like that. But now it's important to talk about tailoring our messages according to the audience. And if you're talking to the indigenous populations, you have to talk in the terms that make sense. Maybe use indigenous languages and learn from how indigenous populations live with nature, right? And this is not something to fight with nature. In the private sector, it is more monetary terms that Tom pointed out. And it's not just a scientific issue, it's a socio-economic issue, right? So and that's when you can reach people about, when you talk about green jobs in the renewable industry and other aspects, that this is actually something that's a positive. This can be turned into an opportunity with investment in renewables. And also for the messaging of climate change, one other point is co-creating messages. Depending on the audience, create messages that make sense, get rid of the jargon. I mean, it's sometimes, we use so many acronyms when we are talking about climate change, right? But it's not really, important to sound smart, but actually be smart so that people understand what is happening and how we can make changes in our daily lives. How can we impact policy changes through voting and, taking public action? So I think that's kind of, the last point, almost there. Okay. Last point I want to make is also, we don't all have to become climate experts, right? There are resources like from the UN, there's climate dictionary. There are, to kind of combat fake news, there are resources like Verified, where you can actually fact check information on climate change. So to make sure you are giving the right information and not be subjected to greenwashing. That's another term when we are claiming to take climate action, but actually not. Yeah. So, the point is there's a lot going on, but we need to become knowledgeable and use the tools at our hand. I'm going to stop there.
And touching on many of the issues that we're all here really to discuss, which is how to better communicate. And also, on youth engagement, I think we all recognize how important that is and how we can really all come together to ensure that the young people who want to get engaged and, who need to be engaged, and they all do, can really become more effective in their actions and their movement. And then we're going to want to touch a little bit on the legal aspects too. We just had somebody at our last meeting Saturday at the United Nations talking from the Earth Law Center. If you have never heard of the Earth Law Center, check them out. They represent nature legally. And it is such a wonderful, wonderful organization, and they're having some major wins in a lot of places. So, this is all part of the discussion here as well, of being all together, all one, all with nature. So I want to ask Heather now to share a little bit about her story, about what led her to really give up this wonderful career she had, and commit herself to climate, and what she's looking for in making investments in climate-oriented solutions, and how we can look to that to get economic gain.
Yeah, thank you. So when I talk about investing in climate solutions, I think about it in exactly this way. There are companies that are doing the most harm, and those are, probably a lot of the oil and gas companies in the world that we think of, the highest emitters. And there are companies that are doing less harm. And we talked a little bit about Microsoft and Amazon. Those are companies that are committing to net zero. And then there are companies that are actually solving the problem. And so those are the types of companies that we're investing in. And because there's been such a growth in the desire to invest dollars in the climate solution, just to give you a sense, there are actually 5,000 public companies that have committed to net zero, in addition to 240 countries now, up from 5 years ago. The velocity of the commitment has been incredible. And I know that obviously we've pulled back here in the United States, and we're so United States centric that it feels like the rest of the world is doing that. But in fact, the rest of the world is actually pushing forward. So we invest in public companies, not private companies. So we invest in the stock market. And the reason that I do that is because that's where I think that climate solutions have the ability to scale. An example of a company in our portfolio is Hitachi, which, if any of you know that company, you think to yourself, oh, it's kind of an old industrial company. That doesn't really sound like a climate solution to me. But in fact, they now have about $8 billion in R&D dedicated to climate solutions, and anything from train electrification to also drone afforestation, which is basically where drones are planting trees, to wind blade recycling.
Yeah, please. Yeah, it's awesome. This is the kind of thing, right, that we need. And what I'm a big fan of is I'm a big fan of the 7 Habits, Stephen Covey, right? Everybody, right? And one of the biggest is to synergize. And so part of collaboration is exactly that. And what you realize is that the more you begin doing that, the faster you solve problems, the faster things develop. And I think that's the ability here. And so, Tom, I'm going to ask you, what are, in your view, and everybody's here to figure out how we can all move things forward. How can we make a difference in our own lives, but also in working together collaboratively? What would be 1 or 2 things that you would recommend needs to happen, or that everybody here should be thinking about getting involved in order to help move things forward?
Oh, sure. I'll give you one, because that's easier than 2. One idea that I think is extremely powerful is the simple idea of talking to your friends and neighbors about climate. They will have the opportunity to get better and better. So if you do the simple thing of talking to your friends and neighbors about climate, what will happen is, at some point in time, you will have an irresistible political movement that the politicians cannot defy. So that's my advice. Win the game by going out and talking to your friends and neighbors.
Awesome. All right. Terrific. And I want I want to ask Sarwat a question about youth engagement. Sarwat herself has just, a couple of wonderful kids, very active, high school and a graduate student at UCI. And I want to ask you, Sarwat, you're seeing that we have a lot of young people coming in and wanting to be a part of our organization as well. What in your view are some of the things that, we can all be doing to encourage more youth engagement and really help our young people become more engaged and active and effective in this movement?
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, there are like two aspects, right? I talk to my students at UCI, and you see some of the students are actually suffering from climate anxiety, right? There's so much happening and they're not sure how they can get involved. And that's why it's really important that they can get involved in their own chapters, like the United Nations Association.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. Okay, great. I see that. I will put a challenge out to the group. But one of the challenges that we have is young people today want to be involved in projects. They want to be engaged in projects where they're actually seeing some outcome of what they're doing, some results of their efforts. How can we organize a more effective way to enable young people to really do that, both on a larger scale level as well as on a local level? So think about that. I'd love your ideas and thoughts. I have a bunch, but would love your ideas. So Heather, I want to ask you a question on investing. Many folks here, how many here are have a company or are looking for investment for solutions? All right, quite a few. So for these folks, what as somebody who's investing in climate solutions, what are some of the key things that you tend to look for or encourage companies to be mindful of when advising them on having solutions that can become really fundable? But one of the challenges that we have is young people today want.
In terms of what we're looking for, we actually look for a really specific impact measurement in a company, which is emission reduction potential. I don't think that metric is used enough, particularly in the financial world. I'm actually an advisor to an organization called Row Impact, and they have a database of all of the climate solutions out there and which solutions would actually have a greater impact than others, because they're not all created equal. I would highly recommend that you think about, is this climate solution, if I'm going to invest in it, right? That's not a philanthropic dollar. You might want to put your philanthropic dollars towards things like peatland rewetting or forest land protection, right? Or things like that, because unfortunately right now, we don't have externalities, like nature doesn't really have a price on it at the moment, right? And so that's more dedicated to philanthropic dollars. But things like solar, utility scale solar, actually has a huge economic benefit today, and you could argue more so even than oil and gas. And it has emission reduction potential, which is its impact, that's higher than a lot of other things. And another resource I would highly recommend that augments a lot of what Dr. English was talking about, that really dives into climate solutions, is called Project Drawdown. Actually on the advisory board for a new module that they're putting out called the Explorer, and it literally has identified 100 different climate solutions that, if scaled, would solve this problem.
Just got the 5-minute notice, but I wanted to just open it up for questions from the audience. Does anybody have any particular questions for either Dr. English or anybody else on the panel, based on what's been discussed or presented? You can go online, and it basically shows you emissions. It's one of the most comprehensive sites to show emissions in your area or a community or whatever. So that data is very valuable. And one of the things that our main goal as a chapter, United Nations Association chapter, is to create a digital dashboard that is going to actually pull data together for climate. to have better climate awareness. So kind of a climate dashboard looking at energy usage and also emissions.
Your question is really important. The success that California had in air quality was in overcoming their lack of knowledge of their emissions inventory. They just didn't know what things emitted what. And they didn't know how to put money out so you got biggest bang for your buck, okay? So this climate trace activity that Al Gore and his friends have put together gives us an opportunity to be much more efficient in creating an understandable emissions inventory so that we can take actionable action based on that. So yeah, go for that.
We actually used Climate Trace when we established our taxonomy. But just to be clear, Climate Trace isn't about the solutions, it's about the problem,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it says, okay, X percentage of emissions are coming from oil and gas versus agriculture versus mining, so on and so forth.
But we need to know about that in order to solve the problem. So I think we have time for one more, and I'm going to ask over here. I believe we have it. The question. Yes, sir.
So his question is, he has like two questions, and one is that after the last UN conference, what happens after that? And then his second question is that, or it's more like a statement, I would say, it's more about how change goes beyond inversion.
Yeah, 100%. And I know Greg is very committed to the interdevelopment goals that the UN also has been promoting, which, to be honest, I was unaware of until Greg brought that up. And I think we're all into, personal transformation as well. So I would encourage us all to learn more about that. But that is part of what Greg's purpose is with all of this as well. And so I think we totally agree with that point.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, it's really important to be, like the last two COPs were like in Baku, Azerbaijan, and Dubai, like really oil producing countries, right? And now we are going to Belém, and hopefully this will be a different COP. And it will be a tough one, but yeah, it's really, people are also very hopeful for that. There are different frameworks available, like the donut economy, planetary boundaries, right? There are different frameworks that can help us understand how we limit pollutions, extract, less natural resources, and living in harmony with the nature while creating economic opportunities for people so they have a minimum living lifestyle. Right? It's also important to be mindful of the term that I talked about, greenwashing and false solutions. A lot of NGOs and indigenous groups and non-profit groups talk about that, and Heather just brought that, climate capture and storage. It's not economically viable. So if we're, so to educate ourselves which solutions actually make sense and which solutions are greenwashing and not viable. So, but there are a lot of resources out there, including from the UN, to educate ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say all of this is making a difference. And so, again, we just have to believe that the effects of synergy and of all coming together, and frankly, AI can become a part of this as well, can really help stimulate a lot of movement here.
And AI can also be part of the problem.
It can be. And so we got to deal with that.
We can talk about.
But anyways, thank you all so much. Thanks for your attention. I want to thank my wonderful panelists here, and thanks for, these great presentations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Just a couple of comments. Dave talked about equal actions that students can take. Our organization will be working after this with Big Sunday and with LA Works, who has a table back there, to mobilize people to do equal actions. So if you want to be part of that, let us know. The QR code that's on your desk wasn't working earlier. It is now working again. That's important because if you use it, you can register to get a free copy of this, my favorite book ever, which I've read cover to cover 5 times, which some of the stories I've read 20 times. The only way to get a free copy is to use that QR code and give us some feedback through that message. And then Cynthia Kersey is the author of that. She can sign it for you if you get a copy today. Third, there's purple handkerchiefs on your table. I wear mine in solidarity with the indigenous folks in the room. I would encourage you to please wear that. If you want to wear it around your head, very cool. or just put it around your wrist, and then either way, that's just to show solidarity. So thanks very much for that. It's the point that I don't want to gloss over here is that time it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think somebody mentioned 130 degrees. I think that was Sarwat. 130 degrees around the world, that's unbearable, right? We need to avoid that. We need to transform our lives. And to the extent that Sia also mentioned, or maybe Dave mentioned, that we can eradicate poverty. This is, I think, maybe 20 years ago, it was unthinkable to be able to do that. But I think now that we have the tools to do that, and that's what we need to aim for. So thanks very much.